It's been a whirlwind since President Trump was sworn in. And often we look at the first 100 days, but so much has happened. Let's look at the first 50 days. I have 5 big takeaways for you. I'm Ann Ahern. This is The Brief.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
Since January 20th, we have seen an unusual amount of executive orders. He has signed more than 80 executive orders. Let's compare that to Joe Biden. Biden signed more than 160, but that was during his whole 4 years in office. Those executive orders cover everything from continuing to build the wall at the southern border, also policies that people are labeling wokeness, ending those, like DEI, and declaring there is only 2 sexes, and designating English as the official language. There's also concern he's going to abolish the Department of Education altogether. However, Congress has said, wait a minute, if that happens, they need to weigh in. We've done an entire brief on the Department of Education and what it handles, what it does for students all over the country, whether you're in grammar school or college. If you'd like to watch that on the brief, here's our link. The signing of all of these executive orders have also been an opportunity for President Trump to interact with the press.
I will say that we've made a lot of progress with Ukraine and a lot of progress with Russia over the last couple of days.
The strategy has been flood the zone, and it's leaving Democrats and even some Republicans scrambling. There is pushback. There have been more than 100 lawsuits filed all across the country. And let's not forget the person having the biggest impact on this second Trump White House. That would be billionaire Elon Musk. He has promised to take a chainsaw to government waste. And that leads to our second takeaway. Reducing the federal workforce. President Trump has given Elon Musk the opportunity to go through agencies with his Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. And that's exactly what Musk has been doing. He's cut thousands of probationary workers, many of them who have worked for the federal government for less than a year. He's also offered them an opportunity to step away, to retire early. He's offered them buyouts. More than 40,000 federal workers have done so. There have been major cuts at USAID and the IRS. They've cut their workforce nearly in half. There have been mass layoffs at NOAA. That's the agency that handles climate science. And then immigration judges outright fired, even though there is a huge case backlog. NBC5 Investigates has found that even if 300 immigration judges were hired, that wouldn't clear the backlog for 10 years. Veterans Affairs employees, they've been laid off. Also employees for the FAA. That happened even with a major plane crash over the Potomac. At Elon's direction, he's asked federal employees to list 5 things they've done to be productive each week. Many of them see that as an ultimatum. Despite those cuts, in some cases, federal employees have been asked to return to work. In the case of the USDA, those scientists who have been working on the bird flu, they were laid off. Now they've been asked to come back to work. Other departments as well, the National Science Foundation and the FDA. The federal workers have been offered buyouts. And in the case of the Department of Education that we mentioned before, in many cases, those who've taken the buyout, they're not being replaced. So how does that leave that agency? That's not all. There have been fired Pentagon officials. In the case of the Small Business Administration, it's announced it's closing offices in Chicago and 5 other cities. Why? Because those cities have sanctuary city laws protecting immigrants. Our next takeaway, the economy, and the Trump strategy rests with tariffs. There's been so much back and forth with these tariffs, focused initially on Canada, Mexico, and China. In the case of Canada and Mexico, it's a 25% tariff. For China, 10%. But it's also been a moving target. Trump did pause the tariff on the automobile industry for Canada and Mexico, at least until April. In fact, within hours of Trump announcing higher tariffs on Canada, Ontario backed off their plans for a 25% tariff on electricity. It is already having a big impact on the economy. The stock market is reeling, and there are recession fears. Did you know that Canadians are the top international visitor? There were 20 million Canadian visits last year, and that generated $20 billion in spending.
I know that these are dark days.
Our fourth big takeaway, the war in Ukraine. President Trump on the campaign trail promised he would end this war, but finding peace has been much harder to do. On the day they had hoped there would be a deal, instead, what we saw in the Oval Office with cameras rolling, an argument, a vocal argument between President Trump, Vice President Vance, and Ukrainian President Zelensky. The world was watching.
You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Since then, there was a massive drone attack in the Moscow region by Ukraine. However, there are talks underway in Saudi Arabia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is there, along with Ukrainian officials. After that meeting in Saudi Arabia, Rubio announced Ukraine has agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. Because of that, the U.S. is once again sharing intelligence information and has agreed again to military aid. There is pressure on Ukraine to accept the Trump plan and end the war with Russia. But there are also questions. The Trump administration seems to favor Russia in these negotiations. There has also been fallout from that Oval Office outburst, with Europe now perceiving the U.S. as not a reliable ally. Finally, our last takeaway, the migrant crisis. It was one of the most talked about issues during the campaign. What to do about the thousands of migrants who crossed over the border. Just within days of Trump's second term, we've seen increased enforcement operations, with Border Czar Tom Homan even inviting talk show host Dr. Phil to join him. Some of those migrants detained have been taken to Guantanamo Bay. As well, there has been an elimination of federal benefits for undocumented immigrants. Sanctuary cities that have not cooperated with the federal government, they've been sued. They have laws in place in those cities that say they will not necessarily cooperate with the federal government unless they're looking for those who have committed crimes. There was just a congressional hearing where mayors of 4 cities, Chicago, New York, Boston, and Denver, they were called upon and questioned by mainly Republican members of Congress to say, why are you not cooperating with us?
Will you turn that criminal over to ICE?
And we do not harbor criminals.
Yes or no? Will you turn the criminal over to ICE?
With a criminal warrant from the federal government?
Originally, Trump and Border Czar Homan said they would focus only on those who had committed crimes. However, data is showing that in some cases, some of those deported have no criminal convictions or pending charges. Trump has also given ICE the ability to go into schools, hospitals, and churches. And there are new indications that federal agents are planning operations to target families with children. Trump promised he'd shake things up. He certainly has. What do you think? How do you like the changes so far? Leave us your thoughts in the comments. That's The Brief. Thanks for checking in.